Welcome, everyone, to the Songwriters on Process podcast. My name is Benno Papari, and on this podcast, I take a deep dive into the writing process behind some of the world's best songwriters. By way of background, I am a former English professor. I have a PhD in English language and literature, and I'm a writer myself. So this is a conversation about writing between two writers. My goal has always been to treat songwriters the same way that we treat prose writers, just as writers, plain and simple. So that's all we focus on. I don't care about tour stories, favorite bands, how bands get their name, favorite foods, anything like that. This is, again, a deep dive into the songwriting process with some of the world's best songwriters. And with that, let's get into today's episode. And today on the pod, it is Rostam. Rostam's third solo album out now is called American Stories. You, of course, know him for his time in Vampire Weekend. He's also one of the hottest producers out there. I loved this conversation because of how introspective and thoughtful his responses are. We always talk about, if you listen to the pod, I always start out the conversations asking about whether people write every day or deliberately take a break. And he said that as he got older, he started to feel less insecure. He used to write every day, but feels like he no longer has to. And he said he lets the field lie fallow, and as it lies fallow, his words, it gets rich in nutrients and ready for the next time to write. So he doesn't write every day, but he kind of sets things aside and lets, again, the soil get rich with the nutrients, the ideas, and then he knows when it's time to write. But he says that he's always collecting building blocks, even if he's not writing. There's a lot of those references here, references to the kernels he's working on. He's always working on these kernels. And he said he's never really truly lets go of an idea. Also, this is probably going to be the first podcast I've done where people reference David Lynch and the Goo Goo Dolls in the same interview. And gosh, Chris Martin, talked about him too. We had a lot of talk about the current album. If you have listened to the current album, American Stories, which is fantastic, a lot of talk here about the genesis behind a lot of those individual songs. So you'll love that. And I fully support his idea that when he says a great way to write is to overwrite. Write more verses that could be contained in a song, and then take the best out of what's there. I'm a big fan of that overwriting initially. And of course, we ended talking about books. And he said, I told him this, I don't know, I've heard this a few times recently. People who deliberately stretch out the time it takes to read a book, they'll read a book over several months to do it slowly, just so they can savor it. I love that. Anyway, lot going on here. If you're a songwriter, I think this episode is really full of bits of wisdom. So again, Rostam's latest album is called American Stories. And here is my interview with Rostam. I always start with a very simple question, and that is, as a writer, do you think it's important to create in some fashion every day? Or do you feel that pushing things and forcing the issue can make things too derivative?
I think in my 20s, I was sort of interested in always having a little bit of creative time every day where, I was either building up instrumental tracks, or just trying to sing and play guitar at the same time and see if anything came of that. But as I got older, I started to I think I felt less insecure, if I'm honest. And I felt like songwriting would be there. And if I took breaks, it's like the metaphor of like letting the field lie fallow. And then, it gets rich in nutrients the next time it's time to write something.
So that's what you do now, kind of letting things.
I have a studio upstairs in my house, and I have downstairs. I also have a piano, and I try to keep one guitar just floating around downstairs. I have a lot of guitars upstairs, but just one downstairs. And I think one of the things I find myself doing is sort of collecting these little ideas that end up, they're kind of the germs for songs. Um, and I'll collect these little ideas on my phone, just like it might just be, a chord progression, or on the guitar, or a chord progression on the piano. Um, and then if I'm sort of like working on any lyrics, I do sometimes just open the phone and like look at a half written song, uh, lyrically on the notes app in my phone, and maybe I like just throw some stuff at it or hack away at it, edit it. So yeah, I guess it's not always about the full act of songwriting, but sort of collecting the building blocks. Uh, and I think I probably do a little bit of that almost every day.
So is there any anxiety at some point if you haven't actually written anything? Are you if something's not happening for a while, are you good with that? Or do you feel at some point like, okay, I should start doing something? It's been a while.
I always have a pipeline, so I always have some kernel of an idea, and I would say probably more likely it's a musical idea than a lyrical idea that is kind of waiting for me to devote my attention to. And there was a piece of music that I made in 2012 that just stuck with me throughout the years, and I felt like finally it's a song now that's on my new record, but it started with a piece of music that I made in 2012, and I just knew there was something special about that piece of music, and I just needed to find the right thing to sing on it.
So, which song is that? By the way, I love the new album. It's
Oh, thank you.
fantastic. So, I'd love to hear the story behind that because I do hear that from songwriters sometimes who there's a song that 15 years ago or something that they started on but could never finish it. So, are you at what point you're not working on that since 2012, I assume, but like, how does that happen? Is there a eureka moment when you finally say, okay, it's time to finish this?
For me, the act of picking up music and putting it down is sort of like part of the process. And I guess I don't feel any shame about like working on something, letting it go, coming back to it, and feeling kind of optimistic about the fact that one day that kernel will be a great song. Just stick with it, stick with there was something that made you love it. In some cases you get so far away from that thing that made you love it that maybe it is worth letting go, but I probably never truly let go of any idea. In this case, that song is called Hardy, and it started with me taking a piece of a film score and really cutting it up and turning it into something new. Um, and the film is called Day for Night. It's a Truffaut film, and the music is by George Delarue. And I remember the night I made it in 2012. I remember the apartment that I lived in Dumbo when I made that, and I just knew there was some magic there. And um, I knew I didn't want to let go of the magic until it became a song.
So the emotional space that you're in when you first start writing that song, 14 years ago, do you have to maintain that emotional space that you're in? Because you obviously wrote it at a different time of your life. I'm really fascinated by that because that's a pretty long time. I looked at now I'm a prose writer. I'm not a songwriter, but I look at stuff I wrote 14 years ago, and that was a lifetime. So is it hard? Do you feel a need to maintain that emotional and that feeling that you had originally, if that makes sense?
I think a way to answer your question is my process often is that I have the dual role of being the producer who builds the track and the top liner who writes on top of an existing track. And one of the ways I love to write is to create pieces of music. I'm hesitant to call it a beat because that word, I think, generationally means different things to different generations. But I like to make these pieces of music and then I'll just, walk around New York City listening on my headphones or bike around Provincetown, Massachusetts, another place I love to go to, or drive around LA. And I think after a while you start to little melodies start coming into your mind, and the melodies sometimes come with lyrics, and then all of a sudden you're like, "Oh, this is something." And it doesn't always happen. Uh but it is, I guess it's almost like two halves of the whole. It's the beat maker and the lyrics and melody. Those are kind of the two halves. And I try to sort of like make it. Sometimes what I call a beat is actually like the most folky chord progression in an open tuning you could imagine. But for me, that has the same power or potential as, listening to heavy heavy drums that make you want to dance. For me there's some power in that, and the fact that I don't have to play guitar and I don't have to play piano when I'm listening back, and I can just sort of let the music be as complicated as it wants to be and come up with a melody on top of it. That is very freeing to me. And I think I sometimes I become addicted to challenging myself. So the song "Like a Spark," which is the first single on my new record, American Stories, it started with me and my friend Amir, and I'm playing these like sort of folk chords, and he's playing these blues riffs on top of it that are, they're kind of rubbing against the major chords. They're playing a minor seventh and a minor third, and it's kind of disrupting the simple, happy folk chords. And I actually wrote my melodies over that rubbing together of blues and folk. And I think there was something about that actually pushes me. Like if your melody is good enough, it can stand up to whatever's going on underneath it. And if you want to write songs that are more complex than you did before, then maybe you have to put more complex music underneath it. That's not always true, and I think there's songs on this record where the chords are incredibly simple, but I like those kinds of songs, and I don't have to feel shameful about it.
I've got a great quote up here by Conan O'Brien, and I was listening to him on his podcast, and he said something that I honestly think it applies to writing in general. And he said, "A lot of writing is sitting and thinking and eating donuts." So what I love about that quote is that I always take comfort in the fact as a writer, and I told my students this, that the writing process is always taking place. That if you're a writer and you think that the writing process only takes place when you're sitting down to write, then I think you're doomed to failure. But I think if you accept the fact that your writing process is taking place when you are riding a bike, when you're sleeping, when you're eating, when you're walking, when you're talking, when you're with friends, anything like that, then I think that just makes things a lot easier. There's less anxiety there. So I'd love to get your take on that. I mean, that writing process is taking place all the time, not just when you're sitting down to write.
I think another good metaphor is, if you want to build muscle, you'd like to think that muscle's getting built when you're doing your reps at the gym, but actually the muscle's being built when you're sleeping. So you need to get good sleep if you want to build muscle. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. Um, so I think for me, yeah, I would say also I felt some insecurity artistically in my 20s where I wasn't sure if I like believed in myself fully in a way. I think as a producer, I certainly felt very confident in my choices and what I wanted. Um, to achieve as a producer and what I wanted to say with production. But with songwriting, I felt a little bit sort of like um, less less certain, and and I think that it took me some time and sort of growing up to get to the point where I realized like there were certain things that I wanted to say in a song that could only be said in a song, and that I didn't really want to be filtered in another way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. With your lyrics, do you do a lot of revising to your lyrics?
I would say I do and I don't. I I think sometimes, like I said, sometimes I'll be looking at the notes app and seeing what the state of things is and touching it up. And then other times it'll just kind of come out and it's like that's that's what it wants to be and don't fight it. Like the song Come Apart, the melody, the chords and the lyrics of the chorus all came out of me, and I didn't really know what I wanted to say. I didn't know what it meant to me. Um, but I think that if I think part of songwriting is trusting that there's something inside that wants to come out, and knowing that yeah, I've said this and I think in other contexts, but it's a combination of like the slow twitch muscles and the fast twitch muscles. Some things come out sort of fully formed lyrics and melodies, and other things require a little revision.
Are you That's something I hear, and I've got actually a bunch of quotes from writers over here, which is why I'm looking, and one of the uh William Faulkner said, "Get it down, take chances. It may be bad, but it's the only way you can do anything good. Just getting things out first." And I interviewed the writer Anthony Doerr. He wrote a book called All the Light We Cannot See and won the Pulitzer Prize like 10 years ago. And I asked him about writer's block, and he said, "I don't believe in writer's block." He called writer's block, and I'll never forget this, he called it a failure of courage. That don't be, no one's that precious. Everyone has something inside of them. You've just got to be able to, you've got to believe it and just get it out. It might be bad, but writing something bad is better than writing nothing at all.
I remember watching an interview with, I believe it was the lead singer of Goo Goo Dolls, um, in the '90s. I watched a lot of VH1 and MTV as a kid, and one of his interviews, he says, um, "Writer's block isn't when you can't write; it's that you write a lot and none of it's good." And I think for me, because I have these sort of two different paths, where one of my paths is my own project, the Rostam project, and another path is that I work with artists. And at this point, mostly I make full albums with them. If I collaborate with another artist, I like to produce a whole album with them. Um, it makes it so I never sort of feel the agitation of like, oh, I'm trapped in this one thing and it's not satisfying to me.
I'm reading a book right now called The Writer's Room, and it's a book just came out. I forgot the woman's name. I wrote it down here somewhere. But what she does is she goes to the rooms of a bunch of famous writers that are now pretty much like museums, like Jane Austen, Virginia Woolf, and she examines the space. And the whole book is about the spaces that writers write in. Now that's different, I think, than songwriters because it's a different lifestyle, basically. But she talks about the importance of the space, having your own space. So I'd love to get your take on that. How important is that space to you, physical space, as a songwriter? Do you have a space? Is that is a dedicated space important to you? Whether it can be certain room, chair, things like that.
Yes, the answer is yes, and I think for me, I also like having different instruments kind of floating around me. I find myself inspired um, by that. I recently had a cello fretted, so the cello now has frets. So someone like me who hasn't studied the exact positions the hand needs to go to play perfectly in tune, but does understand sort of like the chord shapes from a mandolin, which are the same chord shapes that apply to a cello. Someone like me can just sort of start writing chord progressions on a cello, and there's only a couple of those. There's a handful of those fretted cellos in the world. A lot of people would be like, "Why?" But for me, it's a source of inspiration. So yeah, I would say the room is important. Someone once said that a blue room inspires creativity, and I used to rent a house in Echo Park, and the walls were painted light blue, and I was very creative in that house, so maybe it added something. But yeah, I like to have a real piano around if possible. That's another thing that I love is not a keyboard, but a real piano that you depress the key and you feel a physical emotional response from the way that that hammer strikes the keys.
How about natural light? Is natural light important?
Probably. I mean, it's probably part of why I moved from New York to LA in 2013 because I knew I'd be spending a lot of my life in a studio, and I didn't want to be in a studio that had no natural light. So you know, I think that was an appeal of LA that I could have a studio space and have sunlight.
How about time of day? Are you a nighttime person, morning person, day person? Does that matter?
I think I'm an everything person. With I'm also when people say like, "Are you an introvert or are you an extrovert?" I think I'm an ambivert. I need my alone time, and I also like being with friends a little bit, probably every day. It's nice to have a little time with a friend every day.
Now, okay, I'm going to get very specific here. When it comes to lyrics, are you a pen and paper person or a phone/computer person?
I would I would say uh phone/computer, sure. Mouth is something that you can't ignore mouth, right? Because sometimes just letting it rip, I mean, I think I read somewhere that Chris Martin, he doesn't trust anything that doesn't come out together, melody and lyrics. I don't know if that's fully true, but I do think, yeah, just recording yourself singing is one of those, it should be thought of as one of those three, It's not just about writing words with your hands, whether they're on a keyboard or a pen. It's also just recording yourself sing. I think that's something in the mix.
I was saying I was in Seattle last week for work, and I went to the Museum of Pop Culture, and they have a Jimi Hendrix exhibit there, and there's a bunch of his original lyric sheets, and he wrote a lot of his lyrics on hotel stationery, and it was interesting to see the choices that he made. Like you could see the crossouts of words, and I think there was one, I forgot the song, but he changed. There was like one change in the whole song, and he changed the word man to bro, I think is what it was. That was it. And I thought, wow, like how interesting. I would love to think about like why he changed that one word. And I guess for me at least, I'm a pen and paper person because if I look at those things I wrote years ago, it's easier for me to go back to that emotional space I was in because I can almost see myself like, oh, I can take myself back to that time almost by the intensity of the almost how hard the pencil is on the page. Um,
I know some prose writers, that's their process, is writing by hand and then transcribing what they've written, and it's another layer of revision to go from the handwritten to typing it out.
yeah, I can never do that. That would take far too much time. Uh, the one quote that I always give songwriters is Agatha Christie once said, "The best time to write a book is when you're doing the dishes." And the idea of the eureka moments happen when we're our brains are engaged in monotonous activities, which is why a lot of times people get their best ideas in the shower. But I hear people tell me they get ideas while they are gardening, cleaning, doing the laundry. When your brains are engaged in activities that require no conscious thought, that's when the ideas bubble up. So, do you ever notice that happens to you?
Yeah, I think it does. But like I said, I think at some point I became sort of confident, and so I wasn't like scared of nothing coming out or nothing good coming out. It was just kind of like, yeah, it's gonna come when it's gonna come. And if you keep, you know, if you keep chipping away, you'll get somewhere.
Yeah, I love that. That's a lot of I guess my struggle is always do you it, yeah, I guess there's always that fear with me as a writer that if I haven't created for a couple of days, there's a little bit of anxiety. Um, but then if I force it, then it what I see on the page doesn't look good, which makes me feel worse. So what I'll often do is I'll go back to my voicemail or my notes app or anything like that and look at some ideas or go back to old things that maybe like half finished ideas. So do you do a lot of that too? Like, is that notes app just filled? Do you often go back and try to mix and match ideas?
I think one thing that happens for me when I'm in the process of making a record is I'll go through my the notes app, which is like, that yellow pad in the iPhone, and I'll put like a little bullet point next to the title of each song where I'm like, you're gonna finish this for the album. Um, and then I think that kind of reminds me, like, okay, you got to work on these lyrics. Uh, there was one song on the record that it felt like it was such a process to write the song that I started to sort of write about the process of writing the song, and that song is called "Forgive Is to Know," um, where I guess I sort of had a vision of a song with a lot of verses, and I remember the first time actually, like, I think I wrote maybe 10 or 12 verses, and I just wanted to pick from 10 verses as opposed to, like, having only the amount that would go in a song. I remember the first time that I recorded, uh, vocals for that song, and I asked my engineer, I was like, "Okay, how many minutes is that now?" And he was like, 3.5. So I thought I had created this sort of, like, epic poem, but really it was just enough verses to fit in a 3.5-minute song for what it's worth. I maybe the point that I'm getting to is that I do think a great way to write a song is to overwrite and, write more verses than could be contained in any song, and then take the best and put that in.
As a prose writer, you got to do that. I would always, when I was a professor, I would always assign in the essay "Shitty First Drafts" by the novelist Anne Lamott, and that's exactly what we're talking about. The last thing you want to do when you're writing is decide whether something belongs, and it's never faster. It's never faster to do that. I mean, I overwrite like crazy because the last thing I want to do is not write that thing and realize later on that I want it. But more than that, I just need to get everything out there. Part of it is, I think, anxiety that if I don't write it, I'll forget it forever. But I'm a big proponent of, and I would tell my students the same thing. Like, it's never faster to say, okay, it's a three page, it's a 3-page paper. I'm going to write 3 pages. It's much faster to write 5 and get everything out there. I mean, I'm on board with that 100%, but that's, I think, a big mistake that some writers make in any genre is they think that they don't think about getting everything out on the page. But how do you know
What
it,
should be in there?
okay, yeah, maybe let's start with that first. How do you know what should of those 10 or 12 verses, whatever it was?
Well, oh, yeah, you know what? Actually, I will say this is something that I think is maybe unique to songwriting and unique to my process, which is I'll put all these lyrics into the Notes app, and then maybe I'll hold back on recording. And then when I start recording, I always, always, always come up with some of the best stuff. Um, while I'm recording. No matter how good what I have written down is, I always seem to have a couple lines that are my favorite lines that happen in the process. So on that song, Forgive Is to Know, there's one line that's um, the institutions don't reward the compassionate. That's my favorite line in the song, maybe, or one of my favorite lines in the song. And that definitely wasn't written down. It came out of me while there was a microphone in my hand. Or I thought to write it down while there was a microphone in my hand and I was in the process of cutting vocals. So I will say, yeah, I guess I think that when you commit to, I think for me, like when you commit to finishing a song, and like I said earlier in this podcast, sometimes it's just, 4 chords on loop is the beginning of the song. And that's it. That's all it is. Um, but when you commit to that eventually becoming a song, in that commitment, there's sort of like, it's a leap of faith. And I think at some point you realize like the best stuff might come out towards the end. Um, and that you just have to sort of trust the process.
So how much temporal distance was there between you writing all of those verses and then finding that one golden line that's your favorite? Was it days, hours? What was it?
I don't. Mm, I remember writing the chords for "Forgive Us to Know" in 2022, and then I didn't record those vocals until 2025. So there was 3 years there. Um, 3 years of kind of just like collecting verses, collecting lines. Um,
That I've been related to this, I think. A couple of months ago, I interviewed Lucinda Williams, and she said something that really resonated with me. She said, I can write about dark stuff, I can write about sad stuff, but I have to be content to be able to write about dark stuff. In other words, she can't be in that dark space to write about the darkness. She cannot write about darkness until she's content, which kind of just blew my mind when she said that. I'd love to get your take. And then there's various ways. I mean, Hemingway famously said he could never write about Paris when he was in Paris. He needed that distance. So I'd love to get your take on that idea. How important is distance writing about something?
I think there's elements of that, but I also think that one thing I'm interested in capturing is our current moment as a songwriter, and that doesn't mean like doesn't mean every song, but I like to think that like an album sort of needs to come out uh because there's there's things that you're talking about that are meaningful to the moment. Um so sometimes I do think it's important for you to write a song and release it pretty soon after you've written it. Um and other times I don't think that's as big a factor, and you know, other times there can be some distance. Um Yeah, I don't know exactly. I don't know exactly what I don't think I have a good clear-cut answer for you on whether I need distance or not. Maybe there's some things that I've written that, have become more relevant with time, more relevant to my life, but in different ways.
Well, they always say, right, when you write an email and you're angry, set it aside for a couple of hours and come back to it.
So yeah, that's something that I don't know if you read Keith McNally's memoir. I regret almost everything.
No.
I highly recommend it. Um, and the audiobook version is read by Richard E. Grant, so it's a very entertaining audiobook. But one of the things he says is the best piece of advice he got from his mother was if you write a letter in an emotionally charged state, put the letter away for 24 hours and then open it again. Um,
I worry that if I do that, though, that I lose the rawness of the state I was in. Like we were saying, like if you write something immediately afterwards and you go back and look at it later, I don't know that I want to touch it too much because if I look at it a couple of days later, I'm in a different space and it may lose that rawness if with too much distance. There's no right answer. I'm just fascinated by the choices people make in that, right? Whether some people do need to write about it immediately, other people need that kind of perspective of that 30,000-foot view.
yeah, I don't know what the answer is for me. I
Yeah.
mean, I think you're reminding me of this David Lynch quote where he walks into the therapist's office and he says, "Will therapy mess with my creativity?" And the therapist says, "It might." And David Lynch says, "Thank you," and shakes his hand and never goes back. I think I think there is actually I have a lyric on this record on the song "Different Light" where I say, "Sometimes I don't want no words written anywhere in front of me." And I think there is a part, I think, of good songwriting where it is you're not it's not like you're singing things that are written down. It's just kinda coming out, and it needs to be that way. And maybe you don't even know what the song is about. Like, the song "Different Light," I didn't know that the song was gonna be called "Different Light." I think that was the last lyric that I wrote, um, but then it sort of informed everything, and then I think the linchpin was when I went from saying, "You see it in a different" and now you feel a different light, and then I said, "You see it in a different light," which sort of kinda, like, solidified what the whole song could be about, which I didn't know what the whole song should be about when I was writing it. I wrote so much of it kind of blindly, and I think that's kind of the joy of songwriting, that you're going in somewhat blindly and you come out on the other side of this thing and you're like, "Oh, that it you communicated something. You're something inside you wanted to communicate something, and you trusted yourself to do that." And you don't know how other people will hear the song, but on some level, maybe it doesn't matter.
So if I heard you correctly, you changed senses, right? You changed feel to see. Is that right?
Well, at the end of the chorus, I say, "You feel it in a different light." And then after the second chorus, I say, "You feel it in a different light." And then I add another, like a post chorus, or you could call it a bridge, where I say, "And now you feel a different light. You see it in a different light." Because feeling light is not necessarily something that people do, or it, you can feel light, but it's kind of uncommon. I love those kinds of things. I love uncommon um, phrases. I think all songwriters do. I think all songwriters are, like, interested in the common way to say something and sort of the uncommon way to say something. And I think good songwriting maybe is about sort of marrying those 2.
I'm just thinking about that line. It's an incredible line because you're right. Feel it in a different light. That's going to take a while for me to unpack what that means because, like you said, see in a different light. I've heard that a million times, but feel in a different light. That's a yeah. That's pretty. That's going to take me a while after this to think about what that means. But that's an incredible line.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank God I didn't give up. Thank God I didn't give up on it.
Yeah, yeah, I'll think more about that
Because
later.
that did come at the end of the songwriting process. Like the chords were written, the finger picking was kind of how it started. The verses were written, the choruses up to that last line of the chorus was written. So it was kind of like I made myself a puzzle, and then I had to make the last piece um, to make it all work together. And that is kind of scary, right? Because if I didn't get there, um, it wouldn't be quite as good of a song if I didn't find those puzzle pieces. Um, but yeah, that's kind of like that's the thing. Like if you every time you make an album, it's like it shows you your failures are just like, you know, they open the door to the next album, you know, doing the things that you feel like you failed on the first one.
I'm still thinking about how feel in a different light is just so poetic. I mean, if I were teaching a poetry class still, that would be a line from a poem because you're kind of mixing metaphors and you're mixing senses. And like you said, you can't feel light, but what does that mean? That could be like a half hour
Well,
discussion in a
you know,
poetry class.
I actually think you can feel light, but I think you can feel light. You can feel sunlight. Um, you can feel light. I think it's just an uncommon turn of phrase. But you know, it's not that uncommon. Like I feel like there's a line in The Talented Mr. Ripley. I don't know if it's in the novel, but I know it's in the Matt Damon film, um, where he talks about, you know, the feeling of light. Is it Dickie Betts? It's his light shines on you, and it, you know, it feels like the sun is shining on you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. Oh, yeah. I got to think about that too. But that's what makes a great poet. That's what makes a great writer. I mean, poetry is you take something, you take a you it's a way of looking at something that no one has ever seen before. You take a that's what the great metaphysical poets did. They wrote about fleas and they wrote about tiny objects that seeing them in a way that no one has seen them before. I think that's the mark of a great writer is it makes you think about that and you hear a line and you stops you cold.
Wait, I do want to say something funny. Dickie Betts is a guitar player and singer from the Allman Brothers.
Right.
Dickie Greenleaf is the character from The Talented Mr. Ripley.
Right, but then I was thinking Dickie Betts, and I'm thinking the song "Blue Sky," and I was thinking the lyrics, like maybe there is a lyric in there about it. Um,
Yeah,
all right,
so yeah, Dickie Greenleaf is the person whose light shines on you, and when that happens, you know, it feels like you're the only person in the room.
all right, let's end with this. Um, what impact does literature? I mean, I to me, there's a very clear through line between great songwriters who read a lot. So, what impact? Who do you like to read? Whether that has an impact or not on your songwriting, but are you an author person? Are you a genre person? What do you like to turn to?
I would say I would say last year the book that I loved the most was this Keith McNally book, which is a memoir. Um, and it's so much about London and New York, these places that I these places that I have some connection to in my life. So I feel the resonance is there. Um, I would say I know this is like really this is gross behavior. I'm gonna get in trouble for this, but sometimes I like not finishing a book for a really long time and letting it kind of like enjoying the book and letting it take like a year to finish or 8 months or something ridiculous. And there's something about just like not knowing exactly the end, like Miranda July's All Fours. Um, that's one book that, you know, I'm gonna finish it. I know I will, but I'm letting it sort of drag on, or not drag on, but just I'm sort of savoring the process of reading that book. So yeah, I guess I do enjoy books where the person, the author is present. Um, like Huasu's Stay True. That's also a memoir. Um, I know the Miranda July book has elements of reality and elements of fiction, but I guess I'm attracted to that. Maybe there's some parallel in songwriting, like great songwriting. Certainly in this era of the pop star, great songwriting uh, involves that interaction between the person and the persona. And I guess it's also there's a pleasure you can take in reading books where you get to see sort of that interaction between the person and the persona.
So I don't know why this is, but in the past 3 months, and it's never happened before, you're like the third or fourth songwriter to tell me exactly what you said, and that is they'd like to let a book stretch out because they. I don't know why I'm only hearing that recently, but you're not the first person to say that, but it's only been recent.
I think it's perhaps because we songwriters are in this sort of 3.5, 4 minute zone. So, it's rare that you hear half of a song and never hear the rest, or it takes a few months to hear the rest. So maybe there's kind of a joy about like stretching out that consumption process.
Do you reread books, or when you read it, you're done? I'm not going to go back to it.
There's a couple books I feel like I read in my 20s that I'd like to reread, and they're kind of like on my list. And I hope to get around to those.
So when you're finishing a book, or when you're reading a book and you don't like it, are you able to put it down, or do you have to finish it?
Um,
Like you don't like it and you say, do you say, I'm not going to finish this, I don't like this, or do you feel like I've got to tell people I've read this book, so I have to finish it?
I think I usually will get myself across the finish line with time. It may be a span of years,
Yeah, I
but I
could
think
never.
if I get to the halfway point, I'll probably finish it.
And that's it for the latest episode of Songwriters on Process. You can find all of the old episodes on all major streaming platforms and probably some minor ones as well. You can also find them on the Songwriters on Process website. I started the site back in 2011, so that means there are hundreds upon hundreds of interviews with some of the world's best songwriters. So take a deep dive into some of those episodes. They are all great. Of course, I'm biased. Also, shameless plug. My book, Desolation, a Heavy Metal Memoir by Mark Morton with Benno Papari, that is me, is out now on Hachette Books and in all major bookstores. Mark is a good friend of mine. He is the guitarist in the metal band Lamb of God. And so we collaborated on his memoir. I'm biased, but that's a damn good book. Again, it is called Desolation, a Heavy Metal Memoir. And lastly, if you want to get in touch, go to the Songwriters on Process website. You can fill out a handy contact form and it'll get to me that way. You can also email me at ben@songwritersonprocess.com. I'm all ears. Send me your comments, your suggestions, your complaints, people you want me to interview. I get great suggestions all the time. I can't respond to all of the emails because I get a lot of them, but I do read all of them. And let me know your thoughts. If you have ideas for people you want me to interview, there's your chance. And with that, I am out. See you next time.